Hi, and welcome to my narrated presentation about ecotourism on the Pacific Rim of British Columbia. In this photo, we have the Ecotourism Peninsula and the Clayoquot Sound on the Pacific Rim. Let's get started. Introduction. How did the once secluded Pacific Rim of Vancouver Island, British Columbia, become one of the most heavily trafficked ecotourism destinations in Canada? In this presentation, we will be exploring a number of questions and themes pertaining to ecotourism on the Pacific Rim. When I say Pacific Rim, I am referring to the municipalities of Tofino, Ucluelet, and the land in between within 5 kilometers of the coastline, including Pacific Rim National Park Reserve. We will be exploring the history of the Pacific Rim, the pre-tourism history, and how this history has shaped the region. We will be exploring how tourism became the primary industry in the region in the last 3 decades. We'll be examining the rapid popularization of Tofino as a tourism and ecotourism destination, and we will see the benefits of this popularization, but the critical questions of who benefits and at what cost this benefit comes at will be examined. We will be exploring the similarities and the differences of ecotourism in the municipalities of Tofino and Ucluelet. And finally, we will see why Ucluelet might be well positioned for ecotourism development and what this ecotourism could possibly look like. Early history of the Pacific Rim. The history of Vancouver Island dates back a very long time, as Indigenous peoples have been living on this island for millennia. The central west coast of Vancouver Island specifically is the homeland of the Nuu-chah-nulth peoples and has been since time immemorial. The Nuu-chah-nulth are comprised of 15 separate nations up and down the coast of Vancouver Island who share linguistic, cultural, and geographical similarities. The Pacific Rim region is the ancestral homeland of 2 of these nations. The Tloquet claim the territory on the northern end of the Pacific Rim, including Tofino, and the Ucluelet claim the territory on the southern end of the Pacific Rim, including Ucluelet. On the right-hand side of the screen, we see a Tloquet totem pole, perhaps the most iconic Tloquet totem pole that is located in the heart of Tofino. The first Europeans did not arrive in this region until the 1770s, and some of these early explorers were Spaniards and others were British. The town of Tofino is named after a Spanish cartographer by the name of Vicente Tofino de San Miguel. These early colonists traded guns and alcohol with the local First Nations in exchange for otter pelts. By the 1800s, full-time trading posts had been constructed by the British, and in the 1900s, forestry and commercial fishing began to become the primary economic drivers in the region. And fishing and forestry would be the primary economic drivers until the 1990s, when tourism began to take off in this region, in Tofino specifically. The rise of tourism in Tofino. One of the earliest and most consequential ecotourism developments in the region was the establishment of Pacific Rim National Park Reserve in 1970. This park reserve was created by the federal government to protect and preserve the local environment for visitors to enjoy. It is called a park reserve because it lies on the unceded territory of 2 Nuu-chah-nulth nations, the Tloquet and the Ucluelet. It is these nations that have claim to the land, and thus the federal government operates on their territory as opposed to the other way around. Visitors have long been attracted to this region by the natural scenery, wildlife, and surfing, and these have always been the primary drawing powers of Tofino. Tourism in Tofino began to grow significantly in the 1990s. One of the catalysts to this growth was the war in the woods, where environmentalists squared off against loggers and police to protect the forests from old growth logging. This event garnered significant global attention and put Tofino on the map internationally. The destination mix began to change in Tofino after this, but it was always a summer destination until 1996. In 1996, the Wickaninnish Inn Eco Resort pioneered, or commodified, winter storm watching. Guests would travel to Tofino in the winter to watch powerful storms on the coast. This was massively successful, and this luxury resort enjoyed very high profits. Its success led to more luxury development in Tofino and a clientele that was wealthier and spent more money on tourism. Since 1990, visitation to the Pacific Rim has grown by over 40%. In 1990, there were about 300,000 visitors annually to the region, and today, pre-COVID, there are about 1.1 million visitors annually to this region. Tourism jobs employ over 1/3 of regional workers, and traditional jobs such as manufacturing, forestry, and hunting have declined in the region by over 50%. Tourism has brought incredible economic prosperity to this region, and tourism in Tofino generates over 400 million in economic output every year. It also provides high tax revenues to local, provincial, and the federal government, 57 million in taxes annually. It is clear that the economic benefits of tourism in Tofino have been significant and positive, but we must also consider the social and environmental downsides of this rapid growth and development. Social and environmental downsides of tourism in Tofino. One of the most problematic aspects of tourism in the Pacific Rim and Tofino region is that these spaces are often promoted as a sort of wilderness, as places void of all human existence. This racist and colonial viewpoint erases the indigenous populations who have inhabited this land for thousands of years. A critique of ecotourism more broadly is that it often fails to account for and celebrate the indigenous peoples who live on the land where ecotourism is taking place. The First Nations in the Tofino and Pacific Rim region also benefit the least from tourism and its revenues. Many reserves are located far away from the main tourist attractions and destinations, and thus do not see the same revenues and cash flow generated. A social problem associated with the explosion of tourism in Tofino, and one that is also seen in other tourist towns, is that considerable power and influence over local politics have been concentrated in the hands of a small number of land-owning elites. Some of these landowners got in on the property market in the 1970s while land was still cheap, whereas others have entered more recently. Either way, these property-owning elites have one primary objective, which is to make as much money as possible through private ownership and development of land in Tofino. They are by and large not concerned with affordability or community cohesion in Tofino, so long as it does not affect their profits. This creates a situation where those in Tofino who have the most power are not connected to the community or interested in the well-being of its residents. Nowhere is this reflected more clearly than in the housing crisis currently unfolding in Tofino. This lack of affordable housing is being driven by out-of-town speculation and buyership and is harming Tofino's sense of community. Many young families are now unable to afford to buy a house in Tofino, and an estimated 40% of Tofino's houses are second homes, meaning that individuals living outside of Tofino own houses and rent them out to residents without paying their fair amount of property taxes. There is also environmental strain being placed on the region through climate change and increased visitation. Tofino has faced 2 water shortages in the past 15 years, one in 2006 and one in 2009, and this will likely continue with increased tourism and a worsening of climate change. A concentration of economic benefits in this region has led to power relations that are both entrenched and unequal. Those who own property have an influence over local politics, the local government, and the direction of development in the region. Without strong regulation and potentially a move towards community ownership, this concentration of power threatens community oversight of the tourism industry, and the tourism industry may move completely beyond the control of residents of Tofino themselves. In this photo, we see the stunning Wickenanish Inn Eco Resort perched on a rocky outcropping on the Pacific Rim. As I mentioned earlier, the construction of this lodge had profound implications for tourism in the Pacific Rim and Tofino region. Increasingly wealthy clientele began to frequent this luxury resort and others like it after the Wickenanish experienced great success. One city councilor was quoted as saying that this resort completely changed the makeup of Tofino. To the right, we see the end of Chesterman Beach, which is described by some locals as the millionaire's beach. Mass tourism in Tofino, ecotourism in Ucluelet. Tofino and Ucluelet are sister towns, just 40 kilometers apart on the west coast of Vancouver Island. As seen on the map on the right-hand side of the screen, these two municipalities are connected by the Pacific Rim Highway. Being so close in proximity, Tofino and Ucluelet share many geographic and economic similarities, but there are also important distinctions between the two towns, especially when it comes to their relationships with development and tourism. Tofino experienced a tourism boom much earlier than Ucluelet, and thus has developed more rapidly and decisively. The types of people living in Tofino and Ucluelet have historically been quite different as well. Tofino has long been home to vagrants, surfers, and hippies, whereas Ucluelet has historically had more of a blue-collar population, with residents employed in the fishing and forestry industries. Tourism and ecotourism have become the primary economic drivers in both Tofino and Ucluelet. But based on evidence presented in the last slide, I make the argument that Tofino has morphed from a hippie town into a mass tourism destination in the past 3 decades. The words ecotourism and mass tourism have sometimes nebulous definitions, so I will clear this up by defining what is meant by ecotourism. According to the International Ecotourism Society, ecotourism is responsible travel to natural areas that conserves the environment, sustains the local people, and involves interpretation and education. While ecotourism businesses certainly exist and flourish in Tofino, Tofino itself, in my view, represents values antithetical to ecotourism. Rapid development, relentless growth in visitation, and a lack of community oversight over the tourism industry have made Tofino more of a mass tourism destination. While there are signs that Ucluelet may be headed for the same mass tourism fate as Tofino, such as an increase in property prices and the construction of luxury resorts, there is no doubt that Ucluelet is on a different level of Butler's tourism area life cycle analysis than Tofino is. Ucluelet, in my view, is still at the development stage of the talc, where tourism is getting underway significantly and numbers are increasing, but it has not become overrun. Tofino, on the other hand, has reached the consolidation stage of the talc assessment. In Tofino, residents are seeing the downsides of tourism, and many have grown to resent the number of visitors. Ecotourism attractions in Ucluelet consist of trails, especially the Wild Pacific Trail, wildlife tours, kayaking, and a local aquarium. The attractions in Ucluelet make it a good destination for ecotourism to flourish. Ucluelet has the incredible opportunity to learn from the mistakes made in Tofino and create an ecotourism destination that is more sustainable, equitable, and authentic than that of Tofino. Futures of ecotourism in Ucluelet. When considering futures of ecotourism in Ucluelet, it is critical that the Uclueletot Nation play a primary role in ecotourism management. This means the Uclueletot government should have direct oversight over tourism and ecotourism development happening in the region. Indigenous tourism, as outlined by Indigenous Tourism British Columbia, also offers First Nations an opportunity for economic development and cultural restoration. In 2017, the Ecotourism government mandated a living wage of $20.11 an hour for all employees. This was a great show of leadership by the Ecotourism government, and this must become standard practice in the industry. Too many in Ucluelet live in poverty, and wages in the service industry are generally low. Town council must strongly regulate non-local investment and prevent the kind of monopolistic ownership that has happened in Tofino. This can happen through strong local legislation promoting community ownership, disincentivizing second homes, and preventing property speculation. A 2015 report on education-based tourism on the Pacific Rim from Royal Roads University found that education-based tourism is on the rise and recommended that further resources be allocated to developing and marketing education-based tourism. This is important because it allows for more interpretive experiences rather than simply experiences where visitors do not learn anything. Finally, low carbon transportation is essential for ecotourism. This means buses and shuttles to transport visitors around the region. Biodiesel could play a role in this, and the owner of a Tofino bus company is experimenting with biodiesel in his buses. Conclusion. In this presentation, the guiding questions outlined in the introductory slide have been addressed. We have examined the pre-colonial and pre-tourism history of the Pacific Rim region, the origins and rapid expansion of Tofino's tourism industry in the 1990s have been explicated, and the economic benefits of this growth have been outlined. Critical analysis of the social and environmental downsides of tourism in Tofino has been presented, with attention given to the impact of localized power relations. It has been shown that Tofino has become a mass tourism destination, and the attractions and current state of ecotourism in Ucluelet were explained. Recommendations for future ecotourism development in Ucluelet were presented. Thank you for attending my slideshow, and I hope you gained some valuable insight about ecotourism in the Pacific Rim. Works cited continued. Photos cited.